Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Alvarado. Yes, sir. Commissioner Burke. Commissioner Dunn. Present. Commissioner Gilmetti. Commissioner Gordino. Present. Commissioner Kehoe. Present. Commissioner Tavaloni. Commissioner Van Konynenberg. Chair Inman.
Here.
Assemblymember Frazier. Senator Bell. Madam Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll move on to item number 2, and we're going to have a welcome to the region by Mr. Phil Washington.
Thank you, Chair Inman and Commissioners, Secretary Annis, Director Branson, and Director Berman. Happy to have you all here on behalf of Metro. We'd like to welcome you to the Los Angeles region. We're very excited to be hosting the commission here in Los Angeles and to have the opportunity to share with you our ambitious transportation program that we have underway. A program that I would say is made possible through the partnership with the CTC and the vision of the CTC. As you know, LA is home to the state's most congested corridors, including the I-405, the I-10, the I-5, the US 101, just to name a few. The folks traveling in these congested corridors experience about 60 million hours of delay annually. Faced with this reality, we feel a real sense of urgency to provide commuters with better transportation options, options to combat crippling commutes, curb greenhouse gas emissions, and make a more sustainable and equitable Los Angeles. We're acting with that urgency. Currently, we have 8 major highway and transit capital projects under construction, including 3 segments of the I-5, 2 on the west side Purple Line extension, the Crenshaw LAX Transit Corridor, the Gold Line extension to Claremont and Montclair, and the regional connector here in downtown Los Angeles. On top of that, there are another 6 projects that are under construction or that will be in construction next year, and those include the Gold Line extension, the Orange Line Improvements Project, along with the I-5 North and the SR 138 and more. So all of these projects are made possible through state funding awards from this commission and Cal STA. So thank you for that. We really appreciate that. We're not stopping there with the construction of these various projects. I was talking to a group this morning and I mentioned that right now we're managing between almost $20 billion in projects between transit and highway. But really to improve the entire transportation system, we're in the mix of what I call reimagining Los Angeles County. We have our next gen bus study underway to restructure our entire bus system and increase ridership. And the results of that next gen bus study will be presented to our board later on this year. And we are in the midst, and our board just approved unanimously for us to pursue congestion pricing and its potential to reduce traffic, to move people and goods more efficiently and improve transit alternatives to driving. Exploring these possibilities and delivering the transformational projects promised by SB1 and Measure M are going to make the Los Angeles region of tomorrow better than it is today. We put together a short video to give you an update on some of the things I just described to you and what Metro has planned for its SB1 funding to revolutionize.
Is home to 10.1 million people and growing. Metro is leading innovation and changing transportation infrastructure for future generations, infrastructure that serves California and the nation. We can plan these projects, but we need to secure additional funding to build them. In 2017, the legislature approved SB 1 that would create and protect funding for thousands of transportation projects. Metro submitted an aggressive list of projects, and in May 2018, the CTC and Cal STA awarded $1.8 billion to Metro, a momentous decision for the most populated and most congested part of our state. Here are some of the projects: the Airport Metro Connector, the Gold Line Foothill Extension, improvements to the 5760 interchange, light rail between Van Nuys and the Symar San Fernando Metrolink Station, I-5 North widening and improvements. SB 1 is transforming LA County and helping Metro fulfill its Measure M commitments and prepare for the 2028 Summer Olympics and Paralympic Games. We'd like to thank Senator Bell and Assemblymember Jim Frazier for their authorship of SB 1, the members of the LA County State Legislature delegation who supported Metro's SB 1 efforts, and the esteemed members of the California Transportation Commission. Metro thanks everyone for helping us build a better Los Angeles County.
So thank you again for your leadership. That was just a snapshot of what we're doing. And again, we appreciate your leadership. Right now, I'm pleased to introduce another important regional partner working hard with us on this effort, and that is no other than the CEO of Metrolink, Ms. Stephanie Wiggins.
Thank you, Phil. And good afternoon, Commissioners, Chair Inman. I'm pleased to join Phil in welcoming you to Southern California. On behalf of Metrolink, which is the provider of longer distance commuter rail service in the region, I wanted to just briefly highlight a couple of things that are on our radar and what we're working on in providing really an alternative to driving alone in the Southern California region. Now, Commissioner Dunn, I know, has been a writer of Metrolink, but we are really throughout operating in 6 counties, actually, a portion of San Diego County, and we are critical to really connecting people to opportunity every day. Most of our riders actually own a home, so they're using Metrolink to connect to employment opportunities throughout the Southern California region. We are the largest commuter rail operator in the state, and the 3rd largest in the country when you look at the route miles, over 500 route miles that we operate in. Our Metrolink riders make the smart choice every day when they choose to leave their car at home. Over 85% of our riders have access to a car. We know if we are able to provide more frequent service, increase our capacity, we can do even more to partner with our transit operators in the region like Metro and OCTA and others to provide an alternative to driving alone. We help relieve traffic on parallel freeways on the 5, the 10, the 210, the 91, the 134, and many others in the Southern California region. One opportunity we have today, and we want to highlight it because we're partnering with Metro, as well as we hope to invite other transit operators in the region to offer free rides on Earth Day. It's a great opportunity to highlight rail service and the importance of rail service and moving our riders and reducing greenhouse gas emissions on a very important day, and it really dovetails the work that Metro has done last year in offering free rides on Earth Day, and we hope to incentivize more to do that. That's a great way to showcase not only the local investment in commuter rail, but also the Commission's investment in commuter rail as well. As you know, the significant investment in our SCORE program with the TRPA grant last year has been very significant for Metrolink. Sorry, Phil, I keep saying Metro. Metrolink. I just recently left Metro to take on this role. Sorry. The SCORE program and the investment by the state, linking it with its state rail plan, helping us leverage the opportunity that we have with Metro and them being the lead agency on really Part of their Reimagining LA County is reimagining Union Station right here where we are today. It's significant not only for the future of Metrolink service, offering more throughput and for Metrolink riders and our lines, but also for high-speed rail when it eventually, hopefully, Brian, eventually comes to Southern California. So we wanted to also thank the Commission for the allocation that we've received as part of that SCORE grant. Union Station is a significant part of that. We want to ensure that we continue to get the complete commitment for Union Station because it's going to be critical in transforming commuter rail service for the region. So with that, I'll close my welcome. I just want you to know, being the new CEO at Metrolink, my commitment to the employees and the board is to create value and exceed expectations. And I want to do that for the commission as well. So thank you.
Thank you. We have questions? Commissioner Gardino?
Thank you both for your presentations and your service. Mr. Washington, do you have just an extra moment to step to the microphone? And thank you for your lifetime of service in many capacities. In 2016, LA County, under the leadership of many public and private sector leaders, did something that many of us envy and want to learn from with your permanent measure that will generate in the shorter term $120 billion for desperately needed improvements. At another time, I know I would benefit, I think some of my colleagues would as well, to learn more about that multi-year process that led to such a significant success. So I wanted to thank you publicly for your part in that effort and find out how we can learn more.
Well, thank you for that. It was really a joint effort with a lot of partners. We put together, I'm big on lessons learned, so we put together a lessons learned document, and it's aptly named or titled, How to Win a Big Measure. And we'll be happy to share that with you. As a matter of fact, we'll bring you some copies down here. If any of the other members of the commission want a copy of that, we can send it electronically as well. But we put that together, sort of how we went about the business of putting Measure M together, and that goes to the performance metrics and everything that we use to evaluate projects, to determine the sequence for projects and the identification of projects. So we'll be happy to share that.
Thank you. I hope it's a bestseller.
Yes.
Thanks. Phil, before you go away, a couple of things. One, I think we also need to congratulate you on your great farm system you run. So Stephanie's an example of that. Therese McMillan is another one. So congratulations. I think it's a sign of a great leader that really is concerned and is dedicated to the professional growth and development of his team. So hats off to you at those endeavors. And I just want to ask you, how many of your buddies have you called in Denver today?
I haven't called anybody. I think they're going through a blizzard right now.
It's a bomb cyclone, so I wondered if you were homesick for Denver today, or
No, not at all, not at all.
reports we're getting from our Denver office is it is like something you've never seen, so had to give you a bad time about that. But thank you for all your service. And Stephanie, I have a little question for you in terms of your ridership. I love the fact that you know that 85% of your riders own their own home. How much do you really know about your riders, and how do you all amongst your peers collaborate in terms of really understanding our riders and how best? Because for all of us, I think our goal is to increase that ridership. So can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. We have a market research unit within Metrolink that really serves to try to connect with our riders and really helps us develop what our ridership profile is. And every other year, we do onboard surveys. But what we want to do to understand our riders more and their preferences is we actually want to leverage technology to actually get more information about our riders. Last year, we rolled out a mobile app which we're encouraging more of our writers to use because it gives us more information about their trip patterns and also allows us to actually communicate with them more directly. We also recently completed a writer retention study where we actually contacted writers who had left our system, right? Because they give us also insight about how we can improve the service and the experience so we could reduce the amount of churn we have in our ridership.
That's great, thanks. Any other comments, Commissioner Burke? No? Okay. Hearing none, we will move on to item number 3, approval of the minutes for January. We have a motion by Commissioner Kehoe, a second by Commissioner Dunn. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? That motion carries. Item number 4, Commissioner meetings for compensation. We have a motion by Commissioner Gilmetti, a second by Commissioner Kehoe. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Motion carries. Item number 5, Commissioner Executive Director Report. I'm looking right at you and Director Branson.
Thank you. Commissioners, a couple of just scheduling to remind everyone that we do have a joint ARB CTC meeting scheduled for April 9th. The meeting will be held in Sacramento. The Commission will be holding a town hall meeting in Chico for the North State Super Region issues and educational opportunities for all of us. That meeting will be held on April 10th. And then the Commission Road Charge Technical Advisory Committee meeting will be meeting April 26th in San Francisco. Commissioners, we wanted to let you know that we did kick off our efforts to update guidelines for 3 of the Commission's competitive funding programs, which will be covered under Robert's report. Those are the Local Partnership Solutions for Congested Corridors and Trade Corridor Enhancement Programs. We have a lot more workshops planned throughout the spring and summer. After discussions with stakeholders following the January CTC meeting, staff has determined that in lieu of separate workshops solely focused on greenhouse gas emission reductions in the transportation sector, it would be more effective to continue to integrate these discussions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in all of our workshops that will be held throughout the spring and the summer. So in addition, today under my report, we do have the pleasure of, we have Sarah West here from the California Transportation Foundation. The Commission, as you know, has an endowment through the California Transportation Foundation that provides $1,000 to a student each year. And Sarah's here to make that presentation.
Thank you. I recognize many of you. Nice to see you, Lori. We have the California Transportation Foundation, founded 31 years ago, and we give injured and fallen worker grants to people who were injured on the job, on a transportation job, but we also do scholarships. We are giving out these days about $90,000 a year in scholarships, including this one. This scholarship was created when there was a celebration of the CTC's creation. I think it was a 30-year party. And the proceeds from that were donated to CTF. We established a scholarship, and you leave it to us to choose the winner. And we choose the winner from amongst the 40 students that attend our education symposium every year. And if any of you have the opportunity to go to that, it's great. We put 40 students together with 40 professionals and do mentoring and role playing. So this scholarship here is the $1,000 scholarship in honor of the CTC, and we are presenting it to Carly Hollis. Carly is from CSU Northridge. Here, let's do that. She's an urban studies major. So you were talking about the workforce and keeping the workforce up, here's a wonderful person that you should talk to. Thank you very much. Any questions? Do you have any questions? No. Okay. Thank you.
Congratulations. We do have one public speaker, Jared Sanchez.
Hi, Jared Sanchez with Cal Bike. Along with climate plan and California Walks, we submitted a letter just yesterday, and I saw it in the pink sheet over there. So thank you for including it. Talking about our support for the workshops for GHG reduction. Disappointed to hear that you're not moving forward on that. Definitely support the idea and the motion that was brought up by Commissioner Kehoe back in December. I will be involved in the SB1 workshops and hope to talk about that within the workshops. I think there's a lot of improvement there, and there's a lot I can say to it. But thank you for your consideration. Thank you for taking initiative back in December. And just want to say appreciate you doing that, and to reconsider in the future about thinking very specifically about your annual report that you give and how you could develop certain policies around GHG reduction. So everything I stated is really in the letter we submitted, and thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Any comments? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to commission reports. Fellow commissioners? Yes, Van Kynenberg.
My fellow commissioners, I had the pleasure of speaking at Caltrans's Contractors Boot Camp on March 8th. I know this was the first one, and there'll be many throughout the state. If you have an opportunity to participate in that, I would encourage it. Obviously, enlarging the pool of qualified contractors is critical to getting the work done for SB1. So I know they're planning to have some in other parts of the state. So just kind of be on the lookout for that. That's all.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Yes, Commissioner Kehoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to ask the director to track down that Portland City report on the demographics for electric bikes and scooters. Commissioner Gardino mentioned it on one of our phone calls, and we're all looking for that kind of data, so I'd like to see the original. We can find out if the what parts are for girls and what parts are for boys.
Okay.
The pink parts, pink
And
bikes.
if I,
Just because there is some thinking on the commission, among some of us, that the bike lanes might be for the more robust users, and we want to know what the demographic breakdown is.
and from what I understand from the
Yes.
Portland report, it was over a multi-month period, about 233,000 trips by scooter, and the demographics, it sounds like, are rich, not only by gender, but by ethnicity, by income, by geography, and what an opportunity to learn more.
That'd be great. All right.
And by the way, my wife rides one of those scooters in high heels and a dress and loves them.
Okay, then I'm going to add, first of all, congratulations to our fellow Commissioner Gardino. We're very thrilled to have you reappointed, so welcome back. We didn't think you went anywhere, but we're really glad you were reappointed. So with that, also in my reports, I did want to report that I had the opportunity to speak at the final California Energy Commission business meeting that Chair Weisenmiller chaired. Those of you that had the opportunity to work with Chair Weisenmiller know that we in the state were blessed to have a man so committed and dedicated and brilliant serve all of us with his wisdom. And Director Branson and I both attended, and to hear the mentoring, we shared that we'd all received emails at strange hours of the day and night with an article that Chair Weisenmiller thought we needed to read, only to find out that everybody else had also had that. And I think that was one of the real strengths that Chair Weisenmiller had, was really his wisdom, but also his ability to put the various pieces together and to bring people together for collaboration. So it was my pleasure to be able to speak on behalf of the Commission, how much we do appreciate his service to the state. So that's one thing I will report back. I will also report back that I had the opportunity to participate in the Transportation of the Future conference last Friday in Bishop's Ranch. Randy Iwasaki and his group put that on, and it's just fascinating to be able to spend at least a portion of the day and learn about all of the amazing technology and opportunities and things that are going on in our transportation sector. And I would argue it's probably one of the times when we've seen so many things coming forward and so many options. So it's fantastic. And they did have a very good program on freight, I will add. So with that, do we have any other comments from our commissioners? Hearing none, we will move on to Secretary Yanis.
Good afternoon. On the area of governor's appointments, also wanted to congratulate Carl on the reappointment. Another thing, somewhat sadly, but happy as well for this individual, but our Transportation Inspector General Irena Ortega was appointed by the governor to be the director of the California Department of Human Resources. So very sadly, we're losing Irena. But she did a great job, certainly, in the 1 year or so she was our Inspector General, getting us off to a good start. We have at the agency level a couple rail programs that we allocate money. One of them is called State Rail Assistance, and that's a new SB1 program that allocates money to the 5 commuter rail operators and the 3 intercity rail operators and some of the aspiring intercity rail corridors. That's modeled a bit on the state transit assistance to all the local transit agencies, where it's a formula allocation. But there's about 12.5% of that money that's allocated by the agency through a grant process. And last week we announced 13 million of those SB1 awards to various rail projects around the state. And just wanted to mention a few of them. One is in Riverside County, a special events train to the Coachella Valley would build a platform where there's festivals out there, periodic trains that can take folks out there and safely load and unload with the platform. So that's expansion. There's also for the Coast Starlight Service on the Central Coast, some pre-construction money for a new station in King City. And for those Capital Corridor trains that stop at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara, there's a siding that would be funded to allow better access and better flow of trains through that station. And lastly, the Losan corridor down here for the Pacific Surfliner Amtrak, some money to fund new signage at stations along the corridor to help people find their trains. So again, not tons of money as these things go, but a lot of meaningful projects that'll help expand, grow rail ridership. Also, we had some discussion at the last CTC meeting on the housing and transportation linkages discussion in the governor's budget, and wanted folks to know that a budget trailer bill was posted on Monday of this week that outlines the proposal in more detail. The proposal includes significant new money for housing to go to cities and regions, about $750 million of incentives to do the planning, to do the zoning, to work on entitlements, things like that. There's also, as was mentioned in the governor's budget, an intent to have discussions with stakeholders on further developing the linkages. Clearly, housing affects how we travel. More housing opportunities near major transit often allows us to use existing transit more effectively, fill up some of those empty seats, and there are certainly opportunities to do those infill development projects around major transit. And of course, we know because of housing affordability issues, many people have mega commutes, traveling long distances from home to work. And the more we can build housing, of course, will reduce those long commute trips and reduce wear and tear on our roads. So certainly there's a lot of linkages with housing and transportation, and want to work in the couple years ahead on how to make that connection more meaningful so that the investments on both sides are supporting each other. And to that end, the language lays out a process where there'd be some discussion with stakeholders in more the long term by the end of 2022, some recommendations from a stakeholder group with Housing and Community Development, the Transportation Agency, and then shifting into 2023, there's authority proposed in the bill that would link some of the transportation funding that goes to cities such that if housing goals for adopting plans and also doing zoning and entitlements, implement those plans are implemented, that money is continues as is, but if there's certain cities that aren't meeting those targets, that funding can be reallocated to other cities. So it stays within the local funding category, but there could be some reallocation, and that's permissive language in the bill. It says may instead of shall. So there's a lot of discussion, a lot of work ahead, but certainly wanted to make sure the transportation community is following that as well as the housing community.
Thank you, Secretary Yanis. Any questions? Hearing none, we'll move on to item number 8. Director Berman.
Good afternoon. First of all, let's get out our scorecards. I've got a few changes to let you know about. First of all, I'm very pleased to announce that Mike Beauchamp has accepted the position of Caltrans District 8 Director. And I know Mike is, there's Mike. Okay, I think a lot of you may already know him. Mike has more than 35 years of experience with Caltrans, where he served as the Deputy District Director of Construction in District 8 for the past 5 years. He began his career with Caltrans working for the Office of Structure Construction. That's where I began too, Mike. On projects located throughout Districts 8 and 9, and he spent time in District 8 as a branch chief for design and held the position of office chief for the Southern California Structure Design Office in Diamond Bar. He also completed temporary assignments as acting District 9 Director in Bishop and acting District 7 Chief Deputy District Director in LA. And, like me, Mike is a graduate of Michigan State University. We'll sing the fight song later. I also want to thank Janice Benton for serving as the acting District 8 Director, which she did that starting last September. Some of you might remember Jim Davis. He was our acting SB1 program manager. He's now a special advisor to the director, to me. Jim is working on some special projects for me. And we have moved Nabila, you can correct me later if I say your name wrong. Please hold your hand up. Nabila Abi Rashad. She is currently the Central Region Environmental Division Chief. As the Environmental Division Chief, she's been responsible for leading and managing environmental delivery commitments for Districts 5, 6, and 10. Prior to this, she was the Office Chief of Central Region Program Project Management. She started her career in the private industry and then began working for Caltrans in 1999. And so she brings a diverse background that includes both the public and private sectors. And you'll hear our SB1 report from her later. Let's see. I was going to mention Irena, but Brian did, so that's good. I'll just say she's been really integral to the success of the SB1 program, and we're really going to miss her, but I've already got some ideas of how she can help us over at CalHR, so not altogether bad. Last month, I had the opportunity to travel to D.C. for the AASHTO annual D.C. briefing. AASHTO is the American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials. It's all of my peers from around the country, and I was pleased that Director Branson and Commissioner Inman were able to join me. Just to give you some highlights, I was able to meet with Representative Napolitano. She invited us to, she's the most senior California member on the House Transportation Infrastructure committee, and she invited me to brief the caucus. And they were very interested in California's transportation priorities. Some of the things we discussed, first of all, SB1, and everybody we visited was very interested in SB1. And I talked about how we are eager to partner with the federal government on nationally significant infrastructure investments and developing policies that will improve the efficiency of infrastructure project delivery, advance emerging technologies, and foster a sustainable future. I also requested that as Congress develops a federal surface transportation reauthorization act or funding bill, that we would be happy to work with them to ensure that California gets an appropriate share of federal funds. We also talked about that Caltrans is on the leading edge of zero-emission vehicle or ZEV adoption, both in our own agency fleet as well as building ZEV charging infrastructure to support California's target for 5 million ZEVs on the road by 2030, and talked about how while we move ahead, we need help from the federal government in lifting some of the restrictions on activity along interstate rights-of-way that are inhibiting the public-private partnerships to deploy ZEV infrastructure in California. We talked a little bit about the road charge. There's a lot of interest in that, and I reminded folks that California has the largest road charge program in the country. And we also talked about NEPA assignment, and the request that we've been making is that we want to go from a 5-year term to a 10-year term. I feel that states that have a more mature program shouldn't have to be renegotiating every couple of years, and that was pretty well received. And we also talked about California's current total Federal Highway Administration emergency relief program eligible need is about $1 billion, and most of that stems from damage caused by climate change-related storm and wildfire events that have occurred just in the last 2 years. Shortly after the conference, I was pleased to be appointed to a 2-year term to head the AASHTO National Committee on Transportation System Security and Resilience. Now, onto the weather. Our maintenance teams have been providing the critical resources and staff to clear the endless mudslides, patching potholes, plowing snow on our highways. It's been a very busy winter, and I recently had a chance to meet with some of the District 3 maintenance crews, and I was just very impressed, and I know you would be also. These folks are really dedicated to keeping the public safe. They work in all weather conditions, so when there's whiteout conditions and we shut the road down, those folks are still out there plowing. I asked them if they ever give up, because I remember as a kid in Michigan shoveling my parents' driveway. When the blizzard starts, you just go inside and wait. They don't do that. They never stop. They work 24/7. They live in what's kind of a dorm room type facility, so that we have crews out there 24 hours a day. And they love it, and I was really, really pleased to spend some time with them. So sometimes if you're driving up in the snow country and we've closed the road for a period of time, it's because you can't see. It's because of the whiteout conditions. And then we reopen the road, and it's clear, and people think, why'd they close it? It's because our crews kept working. We've had record snowfall this year, and I really appreciate their personal and ongoing commitment to keeping the roads safe and open. We also just wrapped up a great planning conference last month in San Diego. This year's theme was Partnering for Sustainable Transportation, Navigating California's Changing Landscape, and I know at least a few of you participated. This is an interactive 3-day program that brings together transportation thought leaders and decision makers to vision and plan for future transportation systems. We had over 200 attendees representing federal, state, regional, local advocacy, academic, and private stakeholders. We discussed transportation funding, equity and health, urban freight, housing and transportation, climate change, transportation demand management, planning and environmental linkages, integrated travel and ticketing, multimodal corridor planning, accountability, and transparency. And that was all in 3 days. It was a really good conference, and we're already starting to work on the 2021 conference. And this is all put on by Caltrans planners, so they do an amazing job pulling together some really good topics and really good speakers. And if you missed it this time, put us on your calendar for 2021. I wanted to mention the mile marker is out, and I believe you can get it out there. I think that it's already been delivered to all of you. That's also available electronically, but the usual, we look at our performance goals, highlights, and this time around we have a discussion about SB1's first year and how we're handling the workload because of the landmark legislation and some technical strategies we're implementing. Finally, I'm really sorry to report that we learned Sunday of the tragic loss of one of our District 2 employees, Mel Riffle. Mel and his brother were passengers on the Ethiopian airline flight which crashed over the weekend. Mel was a Caltrans equipment operator too, who was on special assignment to North Region Construction. And I also want to mention CTF is taking donations for his wife, who's pregnant with their first child. And I just want to add, District 2 and 3 have really had their share of challenges this year. They've had a lot of loss, homes and of friends, and I really appreciate the leadership of our district directors, people like Dave Moore, who have to continue to lead their staff through some difficult times. So keep them in your hearts. Thank you.
We have any questions for Director Berman? I just want to add one thing. At the AASHTO conference, we heard from Alex Hergott, who is the Executive Director for the Federal Permit Improvement Steering Council. And he's been in that for, I think, about 2 years, or maybe it's a little over a year now. But I think it'd be interesting for all of us to reach out and see if he's going to be in our region anytime, to have him maybe give our commission an update of the work that they're trying to do. It seems similar to what we're trying to do with AB 1282. But I was interested in knowing Alex from his work on the Hill. He gets a little bit energetic, so I'm hoping that he applies some of the energy and helps us get those permits pulled and done. So I don't know who could be point to maybe reach out and ask him to let us know if he's going to be in California, and we could have him give us all an update on what they're trying to do.
So, Madam Chair, we'll work with Lori's legislative team, and Paul Goloszewski can also help with that. So we'll work on that and see, and if it's not Alex, maybe a member of his staff too. So we'll see what we can do.
Great. We'll just, since we're doing something that seems similar, if there's something to learn, or if we could help them learn, it could go both ways. So let's see what we can do. So, all right, we're going to move on to item number 9, FHWA, and that means it's Vince.
Good afternoon. We don't like these energetic people in the federal government, so I'll see if I can squash that a little bit. Actually, I can help see if I can help with getting Alex here. That's something I can reach out to my agency and see if we can do something like that. So let's talk after the meeting.
Perfect,
and
thanks.
see if we can get something set up. Appropriations, can't remember if I talked about this last time. Appropriations, we have a appropriations bill. Remember, FAST Act is our authorization. That's the 5-year appropriation. This is actually how much you're allowed to spend this year. And on February 15th, we got FAST Act level appropriation. So that's very positive for all of us. California received $2 million in testing new transportation funding opportunities, so the grant came out for that. And then the Western Road Charge team also got $1 million. So there's $3 million that are kind of California and others. The $2 million is directly for California and the pilot that you guys are doing here. So there, I asked my administrator last week. I was at a meeting with all my counterparts in the West, had an opportunity to meet with our administrator just to talk about a lot of things, and this came up and the funding, and so there's a lot of interest in just kind of seeing what can happen. So that brought up the $2 million and the $1 million. So there obviously still some focus on trying to keep some funding there to try and help that out. CEQ, so we heard about one federal decision a while ago, and we were trying to figure out how NEPA assignment states would be able to play in that area. CEQ just came out with some guidance recently, which allows the NEPA assignment states, it puts the onus on the state to do a lot of that work. And that's an area that we can help, as Federal Highway can help kind of facilitate some of that discussion if needed. But the one thing in all of that is they didn't make the states report like the feds have to. So all of us are held to the executive order. The states that are not NEPA assignment states or federal executive order have to have certain time schedules and all those things. In the guidance, it encourages a time schedule. So I think, but that's to your interest also. So I think that's an easy thing for California to continue to work on. Right now, I believe we have our MOU for NEPA assignment for the 326, which is our CE NEPA assignment. So that MOU is in the Federal Register right now. Now's the opportunity. I'm kind of looking at you, but talking to everybody behind me to make sure that this is your opportunity to comment on that, get your comments in. You can send a letter to me. That's wonderful. But I'm not the Federal Register. You got to send it to the Federal Register. So please make sure your comments go into the Federal Register. And there's a lot of interest in there. There's a lot of good points that I've talked to different people about, that some opportunities for some tweaking there. So we'll see how that pans out. Also coming in the Register is shortly, we're looking at regulatory updates. So you don't often get the big regulatory updates. One of them is the NBIS, National Bridge Inspection Standards. So they're looking at some regulatory updates on that, so look for that in the Register soon. And then I think, if I'm recalling correctly, that's giving states an opportunity to look at that more on a risk-based as opposed to an automatic 2-year, automatic 3-year type of a turnover for those. And then there's also a regulatory update for the MUTCD, which stands for, anyone? There they go. That's awesome. Manual for Uniform Traffic Control Devices. I'm very embarrassed for all of you. Oh, you were just letting them look good? Well done. Well done.
We respect our staff.
Yeah, there you go. That's beautiful. It's shady, if you ask me. The other thing I want to do, I also want to congratulate District 10, Dan McElhaney and his team for the contractors boot camp. I know at the last commission meeting we talked a lot about bringing on small business and how do you bring in veteran business and DBEs and how do we get that involvement. And Commissioner Von Konynenberg, I appreciate you showing up to that. And I think it's important that we all are at. I know Paul Schneider from my team spoke at that, and it's such an important thing to try and help clear it up. So there's a lot of challenges that small businesses and DBEs have in getting into our program. And I know your SB1 is involved in that also, clearly. And sometimes it's just, oh, wow, I didn't even realize it was like that. Sometimes it's real clear. Sometimes it's a little more complicated. But it sounded, from what I gathered with the boot camp, they really thought it out, had a lot of focus sessions on that, had a good diversity group that was there at the boot camp, from large contractors and small contractors and DBEs, and figure out where everybody can fit into the fold. And I think that's continues to be a very important opportunity. And lastly, I know, take a look on the Caltrans website, I believe, with the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. We're doing an update this year, so we're trying to get some input on all of that. One of the areas we're really focusing on is trying to get tribal input in that. Tribes in California, we've got 109 to 113, depending on which day you talk to me, on federally recognized tribes. There's only 530 in the country. And we've got over 100 in our state alone. So odds are, if you're doing work in California, you should be talking to a tribe, and probably in many cases more than one tribe. So make sure we are reaching out to that. And also, I have just two members of my team here. I got Monica Gordine, she's our Associate Division Administrator, and I have Tasha Clemens, she's our Director of Planning and Environment. I know she participated in the RTPA meeting, but anytime I get a chance to point out people on my team so you can call them instead of me, I like to point out people on my team so you can call them instead of me. So
We thought it was because it was International Women's Day last Friday and you were just a couple days late. Right?
Listen, I'm just a puppeteer, and I'm a puppet, they're the puppeteer, so that's all I do. Any questions?
Okay, come on. Someone's going to have
Yes,
a question
good
for
job.
this.
But Paul, again, I appreciate you participating in that. It really shows leadership, It shows that the leadership in transportation in California is very interested in the topic of getting small businesses playing in the circle.
Okay, here comes your question, Commissioner Dunn.
Bring it on. Bring it on.
Is there anything, Vince, in your circle talking about an all West Coast states road pilot charge from the federal side?
So from yes, because that, so.
I mean, a pilot project for all of the West Coast states.
So I think the key to it is the funding of that pilot. I guess what I would argue is that that's the type of thing that would come in stages. I think the Western Road User Charge Consortium, I think, is that the right title? Or good job, thanks for nodding, Lori. The focus of that group and their ability to work across the states will allow something more to happen. But the funding that we have in the FAST Act to allow that, or that that's funding these studies, I think is where Federal Highway is showing, yes, we're very interested in that.
So you're sort of waiting for us to come to you guys with a proposal on that one to take it. I mean, I know it's still baby steps that we still have to do, coordinating with a bunch of states and maybe even Canada, but I was trying to look for a big, hairy, audacious goal to think about. And it's really, you're kind of waiting for us. You're not really pushing Western states. Or are you?
I don't know that we have a place to push.
Right.
So it's not our role. By law, I can't push you to do that.
Got it.
So I think what we're saying is, hey, we know there's some challenges we're having in the funding.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to fund, and actually Congress said this, we're going to fund an opportunity to go look at some of the other transportation funding opportunities. So that's kind of where we're at. As Federal Highway, we're trying to make sure, in fact, I had this discussion with my leadership last week. I had a meeting with all the division administrators in the West, focusing on that, like where are we at? What can we be doing to kind of help facilitate that, and really focuses on what the results of some of these studies are.
Any further question? Hearing none, thanks, Vince.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on now to regional agencies, item 10. Luke.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners. I'm Luke McNeil Caird with the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency and the RTPA moderator for 2018-19. The regional agencies, of course, are excited about the next round of SB1 funding, and we appreciate CTC staff getting started with the 2 workshops occurring this month. These programs are going to improve the transportation system throughout California, and the regions are engaged and will provide feedback to CTC staff that encourages enhanced mobility of people and goods. Another important program for funding transportation improvements in California is, of course, the STIP, and we received an overview of the assumptions for the 2020 fund estimate, which is being presented to the CTC today. The regions look forward to working with CTC staff over the next couple of months to develop the 2020 STIP guidelines, and we, of course, would appreciate the opportunity to provide early input before the adoption in August. There is a lot of discussion around the active transportation program, with the report being released by the Legislative Analyst Office. The report does recommend providing more flexibility for projects selected under the MPO component of the program, and legislation is being considered to provide that additional flexibility. And so the regions are looking forward to working with CTC to improve Cycle 5 of the active transportation program. Lastly, Caltrans staff provided an update on the 2050 California Transportation Plan and the supporting modal plan updates. And of course, of particular interest is the California Freight Mobility Plan, which is anticipated will need to include projects funded under the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. The Freight Mobility Plan is anticipated to be completed by December of 2019, and we've made the request to Caltrans to provide the RTPA group an opportunity to review the proposed project list before the draft document is released. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have questions from the commissioners? Luke, I have a question for you. Last time at our hearing, you mentioned that your agencies were engaged in the discussion about the new water policy guidelines. So do you have an update on that?
I don't have a direct update. I know that several of our agencies have been working with CTC staff and that they have been continuing to be engaged in that.
Okay. Secretary Annis.
Yeah, and I believe my understanding is the Water Board has an upcoming hearing on August 2nd. I'm sorry, April 2nd, and perhaps they might have revisions out March 22nd. So there may be some changes to the guidance coming.
I think, yeah, it's my understanding that it's kind of a red line maybe version now. So I just want to make sure that all of our partners are engaged because it's very important for everybody, I think, to engage and not have unintended consequences that nobody was really thinking about. And because of the way we all work together and the way we are integrated by virtue of the fact of our different funding streams and who takes lead, when, and where, I think it is. I just want to encourage you to encourage all of your members, and we'll talk. I think we have an agenda item later, but I was interested. All right, we're going to move on to our rural counties. Maura. I'm thinking this isn't Maura.
Correct. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Chair Inman. I'm Woodrow Deloria with the El Dorado County Transportation Commission. I'm speaking on behalf of the Rural Counties Task Force today in Mara's stead. The RCTF met on March 9th and just had a robust discussion on a number of issues and opportunities that face our expansive geography of the 26 rural counties in the state. RCTF members are looking forward to participating and having a voice in the upcoming SB1 workshops and the subsequent competitive grant funding that will be available. While some of the SB1 programs are more urban-centric, there are certainly those which can help our rural partners with the much-needed investments to make transformative improvements which do support our rural communities. Investment in rural transportation through SB1 not only supports our rural residents, but also plays a critical role in supporting the interregional tourism and recreation travel and the resulting rural economies that rely on our rural transportation system to access those locales which many of the urban and suburban Californians choose to spend their free time. Additionally, during the March 9th meeting, the RCTF received a presentation of the update of the California Transportation Plan, which presented us a few concerns about the lack of workshops in rural communities. Fortunately, Caltrans staff presenting the plan agreed to an additional workshop, providing rural partners with that opportunity to weigh in on the plan development, which we understand is in the very early phases of development. Our CTF members appreciate the commitment of this additional outreach and look forward to working with Caltrans to plan and organize that workshop in one of our rural communities. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? I would just have the same comment back to you that we did to Luke in terms of our rural county partnership in the water issues and make sure. I know there's been tremendous interaction with the ag community and the water board, so just make sure you all are at the table and participating.
Absolutely, we appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to item number 12, self-help. Keith Dunn.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Keith Dunn, Self-Help Counties Coalition, and to the chair, I would just like to say that we are engaged in WOTUS and participating in the calls. To get that out of the way up front, we have heard your
come on, Keith.
And we are engaged with the leader of that coalition, who is an old office mate of mine, and trying to be as helpful as possible. We do believe and understand the connectivity on that issue, so Self-Help Counties is participating in that effort. I would like to say also that Self-Help Counties continues to look forward to participating in the guidelines and development of all the programs that have been mentioned before. So my colleagues mentioned those, so we will stipulate that we too are looking forward to participating and weighing in with your staff on the guidelines as we go along and develop them for the various programs. I would like to say and report that Self-Help Counties sponsored legislation, AB 252, which would extend the NEPA authority to Caltrans passed out of committee 15-0 yesterday. It currently has no sunset, so we are actually moving forward without any sunset in that legislation. Oftentimes, the legislature likes to put that in just so that we can come back and discuss how successful or changes that may need to be implemented in the program. This is now the fourth time that I've done this bill. I think that we can confidently say that it's been a success, that it saves money. We're hopeful that the process that's often catches us in the Senate will be open to the facts of this particular piece of legislation, in that it has been successful, it saves money, and we don't need to have any sunset, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. It's a good program and it needs to proceed. I also would like to report that this Congress has decided, at least some of the majority parties members, to look at our concerns over the excise tax on aviation fuel. I'll be traveling to Washington next week to meet with an office to talk about legislation that would fix our issue. We're partnering with the state of California in those discussions, and hopefully we'll be seeing some legislation which will protect that important funding source for self-help counties who've made promises to our voters and need to make sure that we're keeping those promises and that those funds are directed as they were approved by each county. Along those lines, we're also actively participating with legislators who put their vote for SB1 to make sure that those funds remain intact. We, with great anticipation, listened to the governor's comments on housing and transportation. We too believe that housing and transportation are linked and important. We also believe that the voters and the legislature made a pretty strong statement on SB1. And we believe that those funds need to continue to be used for what the voters and the legislature approved, and we're looking forward to participating with the administration to help them reach their goals with providing affordable housing for Californians, recognizing that SB1 funds were approved by the legislature by 2/3, then endorsed by the voters, and then again protected by the voters. So there's a number of measures that have popped up that we will be weighing in on and feel pretty strongly about, and we'll look forward to keeping this body informed of our efforts. With that, any questions, I'd be happy to entertain.
Were any questions? Okay, thanks, Keith.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 13, Innovations in Transportation. Garth?
Yes, this is an informational item. And this afternoon we have Mr. Hussein Cumber and Mike Salzman will provide a brief informational overview of Express West, a proposed high-speed rail passenger line between Victorville and Las Vegas along the I-15 corridor. Mr. Cumber is the Chief Strategy Officer of Florida East Coast Industries, and Mr. Salzman is the Chief Development Officer of Virgin Trains USA. And with that, I'll turn it over to them.
Thank you, Garth. Madam Chair, fellow commissioners, it's great to see many of you again. Really excited to be with you here today. We've been meeting with some of you in one-on-one meetings, and it's nice to be able to be at a point now where we can have more an open discussion. I'd be a little remiss if I didn't start off by acknowledging the excellent working relationship that we've had with CalSTA, Caltrans, the District 8 staff, as well as Chad Edison on Secretary Annis's team. As well as the local transportation partners throughout California. Just this morning, we met with your new Metrolink CEO, and we've met with LA Metro staff, and wherever we go, we've been warmly greeted, and I think met with a lot of excitement that this project is actually on a timeline that is going to move forward now. Let me just also acknowledge one other person in the audience with me. Andrew Mack can raise his hand. Andrew's been part of the Express West team really since its inception, and has come over, and started working with the Virgin Trains USA team now. Also getting past, I think Garth passed out the economic impact analysis report. We wanted to provide this to you today because it's been provided to some of the public agencies, and given the fact that we've done that, we thought it was important to make sure that you've seen what, the impact that this project is going to have on the state. So we're going to start off with a very short video. I will give a brief overview of who we are, the background of the company, what we've done in Florida, just to give you a snapshot. And then I'm going to ask Mike Saltzman to kind of talk through how we've approached station development, and then go into the Express West project and the timeline for moving forward with it.
Our story begins in 1885 when American industrialist Henry Flagler, already well known for establishing Standard Oil alongside John D. Rockefeller, set his sights south and moved to Florida to pursue interests in real estate development. He would quickly become the driving force behind the growth and development of what is now the nation's third largest and most visited state. Fast forward to 2007, when all of Flagler's businesses, now collectively known as Florida East Coast Industries, FECI, were purchased by Fortress Investment Group. Given the growing congestion on Florida's major highways, especially I-95, it didn't take long for the team to recognize the opportunity to leverage existing rail infrastructure to connect Florida's cities with passenger rail. In 2018, after 3 years of construction, we opened Brightline, the nation's first privately funded high-speed passenger rail system. Our first route travels between Miami and West Palm Beach with a stop in Fort Lauderdale. Passenger rail, a transportation modality largely neglected for the last century, was suddenly revitalized in America. Contemporary cultural trends have made this new travel option all the more compelling. Increased demand for productivity while mobile, decreased demand for single vehicle ownership, the emergence of ride-sharing to get people to and from train stations, and the general trend towards safer, more eco-friendly, and experiential travel. By the end of 2018, we were carrying 100,000 passengers a month and had already become a critical component of the transportation network in South Florida. Our next step is expanding our Florida system to Orlando, with additional extensions planned for Disney World and Tampa. Our model has already proven successful in other markets where routes are too far to drive but too short to fly, where capture rates of the travel market average 20% and profit margins 50%. The second facet of our business model is the development of transit-oriented real estate. With the increasing urbanization of the U.S., people are seeking transit-oriented developments where they can live, work, play, and have access to great transportation. Our first planned expansion outside of Florida is Southern California to Las Vegas, a market which, like Florida, is a huge and congested route with 90 million visitors, 15 million residents, and over 50 million trips per year. Here we'll cut travel time from nearly 3 hours to just 90 minutes, all for less than the cost of gas and parking. Brightline, which will soon be known as Virgin Trains USA, is positioned as the most comfortable, reliable, fastest, cheapest, productive, and safest way to get people between highly populated cities that have congested corridors. We're positioned to transform regions and create connectivity between cities that was previously thought impossible.
So that provides a good overview as to what we accomplished in Florida and why it was very important for us to look at Express West as the next logical extension. A couple key things that I wanted to stress as to why Florida was a success for us and how that fits into how we're approaching the project here. So as you saw in the video, we talked about leveraging an existing corridor. And so on the map on the left, Jacksonville to Miami, if you drew a straight line down the east coast of Florida, that was a freight railroad that we had acquired back in 2007 when Fortress Investment Group took the company private. And so having that existing corridor and not having to go out and acquire rights of way was a huge advantage that we had. In addition, the red dash line that you see connecting Orlando to Cocoa, that's actually a state road, State Road 528, where we have leased right-of-way along that corridor in order to access Orlando International Airport. And so very similarly, as we looked at the Express West project out here, we'd be leveraging an existing corridor, namely I-15, and being able to bring down the cost of implementing these types of projects significantly. And that's why I wanted to recognize early on the great teamwork that the CalSTA team and Caltrans team have had with us. So our current Florida system, as we mentioned, we are annualized right now over 1 million riders, which is exactly on track on our ridership study. We see a 3-year ramp up for Florida. What's great about these types of systems is all of you know, being in the transportation sector, as I tell people, it's like an airplane. You got to cover your fixed cost, and then every passenger you get over that really is accretive to the bottom line. You don't put any more fuel on the train. You don't put any more people in the locomotive. You don't have more crew as you get additional people once you cover that fixed cost. And so for us, the ability to get to that break-even point in any of these systems really results in a very small modal shift occurring, where people get out of the car or out of a plane and are able to get on the train. What we've seen in Florida, and what I think we're going to see more nationally, is airlines also wanting to get out of the short-haul market. And so most of the cost for airlines is on takeoff and landing when they're burning the fuel. It's not on actually flying. And so what we've seen in Florida is a lot of the carriers getting out of the short-haul market, which really gives us the opportunity to fit into that 250-mile, 3-hour travel time aspect. I wanted to bring this slide up because I think it just mirrors exactly what we see in Southern California and Las Vegas. And so when you think of Florida being the third largest state with 20 million residents, and then you think of the LA urban area being one of the, if not the largest in the country, that's what you want, is you want to home base a population where people are in a congested scenario. You look at the 110 million annual visitors to Florida, you look at the visitors to Southern California and to Las Vegas, and being able to move those people back and forth becomes really important. I often tell people that if we can get people to come to the U.S. when they're coming from abroad, and you can get them to stay for an extra period of time to spend more of their disposable income, then we're actually doing a good thing. And I think what this system will do is fit into that, that connectivity for annual visitors that want to stay here for a longer period of time. And then Florida's the gateway to Latin America. California's a gateway to Latin America as well. It's a gateway to Asia. And so a lot of the people that are coming into the state are used to these types of travel options back home. And I think that becomes very important for us. I'm going to turn over the presentation to start with stations to Mike, but what I would also like to end on my part is we had a great delegation come out from California to see the system. We've had a great delegation come out from Las Vegas. Unfortunately, the California trip happened right in the transition between governors, and so I know a lot of the folks were kind of conflicted in being able to get all the way out to Florida to see this, but I really urge you to come out. We invite you to come out. I think seeing the system really kind of opens people's eyes to what we've developed, not only from a station perspective, but from a train perspective. Our trains, I should also highlight, the trains you saw were built here in California, in Sacramento by Siemens, and we're very proud of that partnership that we developed with them. Mike?
Thank you, Hussein. So I'll just touch quickly on the stations and really want to highlight three key themes, I'd say, as we contemplated the design and development of our three stations today, and certainly would carry these themes to our future stations in Florida and, of course, in the LA to Las Vegas route. So those are really the idea of a mobility hub, number one. And what you can see in the graphic on the left in front of you is several connection points to all of the transit systems really in Miami-Dade County. So what you've got there in the blue is the Metro Mover. So it's a free people mover that really moves a huge number of people around the downtown and Brickell area. You've got Metro Rail, of course, essentially the subway system that connects in, has 2 station stops right adjacent to our station. And then, of course, Tri-Rail, which is the commuter rail service that really runs parallel to our system. We certainly view it as a real partner in what we're trying to accomplish in Miami, in that they currently stop everywhere from Palm Beach County down through Miami-Dade, but today terminate at the airport, which is several miles west of downtown. And so we've actually invited them into our station. It'll open about a year from now, have 2 dedicated tracks. So again, this notion of an intermodal hub that we've really created in Miami. Second theme is, of course, transit-oriented development. So I think you saw in the video, we've built approximately 1.5 million square feet of TOD content, principally around the Miami station. Also built a 290-unit residential building immediately adjacent to our West Palm Beach station that's open and leasing up nicely. But in Miami, we, again, as Hussein said, we'd invite you to come down and see what we've accomplished. But it's a really substantial investment, more than $1 billion of capital. We've got 2 office buildings that are now fully leased. We've got 2 residential buildings, the first of which will open later this year with a total of 800 units. We've got about 130,000 square feet of transit-oriented retail, which is opening in phases. So again, the idea of intermodal hub, the idea of a live, work, play environment that's really somewhat new to South Florida, and we're seeing some great traction so far. And again, these are themes that we'd certainly carry to our future corridors. I'd say the last piece that I would highlight is really just the hospitality-centric approach that we've taken with our system and our stations. If you come visit us, what you'll see, first of all, on the service side, just warm, friendly employees, but also a design aesthetic that really, we think, takes train travel to the next level. And certainly the partnership with Virgin, which I'll touch on in a few moments, will reinforce that. So our next corridor is, of course, the Express West corridor from Southern California to Las Vegas. And I think Hussein mentioned some of the key features of the corridors that we see as attractive. Certainly this notion of too long to drive, too short to fly, 250 to 400 miles, big population centers and big tourist visitation. And clearly the Southern California to Las Vegas markets fit the bill. And so we, of course, announced our intent to acquire Express West last fall, and we're working diligently with them really on essentially a reevaluation of the record of decision that they had pursued over the last several years. So working closely with FRA and, of course, the 2 transportation agencies in the respective states, kicked off that process about a month ago and hope to wrap it up in the next 6 to 9 months. And it's been a great partnership again so far from a development, design, and engineering standpoint. And then we've also started to look at, as you look at the map here, possibilities to extend the system into the LA basin. So we've of course talked over time, and Express West has about connecting via the High Desert Corridor to Palmdale. And we've engaged with both LA Metro and Metrolink, really just to start to think about what that partnership could look like. Of course, a connection point in Palmdale at first, and potentially the possibility of one seat ride over time. But all very exciting, and I think the net result is a travel time that for those of you who have taken the ride from down here to Las Vegas on a Friday or come back on a Sunday, sitting in a 23-mile backup on the 15, we certainly think a 90-minute ride will be quite compelling, particularly when you combine it with the higher touch service and really Las Vegas-like experience that we think we can deliver. So lastly, just wanted to touch quickly on the Virgin partnership. We also announced this partnership late last fall. And it really is primarily a licensing and branding deal. So we're working very closely with Richard Branson and his team to think about how we convert the Brightline brand to Virgin. But really the management team will remain the same, ownership will remain the same, and we just see this as a powerful lever from an awareness standpoint. Of course, Virgin, well known in the travel and hospitality sector, they are in the trains business in the UK, and we just think there's a lot of great synergies between our 2 companies, and I think we're just scratching the surface of what we can accomplish together. So with that, I'll wrap up. Certainly open to any questions, but thank you for hosting us.
Okay, we have a question first by Commissioner Gometti, and then we'll go to Commissioner Burke.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Are you utilizing the existing tracks, or are you putting in new tracks? And, well, I guess the first question, are you utilizing what is now proposed, well, I guess to start soon, the LA Las Vegas once a week trip? Are you using are you part of that, or how does it relate?
We are not part of that. We are building new tracks, principally in the median of the 15 corridor.
I see. It'd be a different route.
An entirely different route from the existing tracks, correct.
And the existing tracks, my understanding is it's going to be just weekly. Are you proposing like a daily?
Really hourly service to begin,
hourly service.
And potentially increasing from there, yes.
And it'll go from Victorville to Las Vegas?
Yeah, the
and then
initial
ultimately down
project
to Los
that
Angeles?
Andrew and the Express West team had worked on and permitted was from Victorville to Las Vegas. As I mentioned, we've explored several routes into the LA Basin, including the High Desert Corridor to Palmdale, and through, potentially that MetroLink corridor into Union Station.
But this would be, you say, an hourly route
That's right.
that would,
That's right.
yeah, certainly we should look at Bakersfield, LA, to connect it up.
Yeah.
Because at this time, there is no rail.
We, just like you saw on the Florida map, we started with Miami to West Palm Beach. Then we're going to Orlando. Then we're getting to Tampa. We own the passenger rail easement up to Jacksonville. And so our goal with this project too is Vegas to Victorville is step one. And then we continue to look at other corridors. Projects like this become very cost prohibitive if we were to start on day one and say we're going to have a 1,000-mile system. Our hope here is we will become a great corporate citizen of California, and as other corridors become available for us to look at, we'll continue to look at expanding the system. So we're not locked into saying it's Victorville, then it's Palmdale, and then we're kind of done and we're moving on. We look at being able to fill a gap where there's a transportation need and it makes financial sense. I think the key for us is we take ridership risk. We don't ask for any operating subsidies. And so it needs to make sense from that perspective for us.
When do you start construction? And at what end are you starting in on the tracks?
Yeah, so great question. So our environmental record of decision for the project, the NEPA process, was completed back in 2011. The U.S. Department of Transportation, specifically the Federal Railroad Administration, is doing a reevaluation of that record of decision. They were out here a few weeks ago and they asked Caltrans and Nevada DOT and Bureau of Land Management if everyone could work on this timeline of about 6 months. So we would expect to have all our environmental stuff done by September of this year. That would allow us to have a shovel in the ground by the end of the year, first quarter next year. And then you're looking at about a 3.5-year construction schedule.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gometti?
Madam Chair, thank you. I guess my questions are more generic about how you put this thing together in Florida. We built our railroad systems in this country by the government participating and giving the land to railroad companies who privately financed the construction and operation of those lines. I'm curious as to what percentage of the Florida project was public and what percent of the project is private?
So great question. So the corridor, if I go back to that station map, if you kind of look at our rail corridor, we come right into downtown Miami. And if you carried it straight up, we connect downtown Fort Lauderdale, downtown West Palm Beach. So Miami really didn't even exist when Henry Flagler built this rail line. So we were blessed that cities grew up around us as opposed to us having to go around cities. I say that because, and when we bought the freight railroad, the fact that we were able to take a passenger rail easement out of a company that we owned obviously was a huge benefit for us. With respect to how we funded this project, there is to date over $1.5 billion of equity in the project. At final capital structure for Miami to Orlando, you'll have $2.7 billion of tax-exempt debt, and I'll get back to that in a second, and about $1.8 billion of equity in the project. So it's about a 60-40 debt equity split. The tax-exempt debt that we issued was from the U.S. Department of Transportation's private activity bond program. And so when I say that we've issued, I should say we've issued $600 million of it. We're actually about to start for the Orlando segment to sell the balance of it. But that is where the public participated with us, is by giving us the ability to sell tax-exempt debt. And that was very important for the capital structure of the project.
They provided no right-of-way.
Well, the only right-of-way that was provided was the last 35 miles to Orlando. And there we're actually paying a lease payment. It wasn't, it wasn't an in-kind investment in the project.
So in case of the line to Las Vegas, you mentioned you're using public right-of-way?
Correct. We intend to.
Under a similar structure, we would expect a lease payment for accessing that right-of-way.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Hearing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to item 14. Paul?
Commissioners, tab 14 is an action item. Commission staff are recommending you adopt positions on 2 bills and send letters to the authors. First, staff are recommending you adopt a support position on AB 371 by Assemblymember Frazier. This bill would require the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, GoBiz, to prepare a statewide economic vitality assessment of the California freight industry. GoBiz would conduct this assessment in consultation with the Commission, the Air Resources Board, and the Transportation Agency. We think this assessment will help with the state's freight planning efforts, and so we recommend a support position on this bill. Second, staff recommends supporting in concept AB 659 by Assemblymember Mullen. This bill creates a new transportation technology competitive grant program for cities that would be administered by the Commission. The Commission recommended creating such a program in its 2017 annual report to the legislature. Staff is recommending a support and concept position on this bill because we think more work needs to be done on the fund source for the program, as right now the bill calls for using Prop 1B savings. In addition to the 2 bills, the book item includes a list of, in addition to the 2 bills on which we recommend a support position, the book item includes a list of bills being monitored at this time pursuant to the Commission's bill monitoring policy. It also includes a status update on the 2 bills that you adopted a support position on in January. And as Keith Dunn mentioned earlier, AB 252 was one of the bills that you had adopted a support position. This is the bill that eliminates the sunset date for NEPA delegation, and it's passed the Assembly Transportation Commission, the Assembly Transportation Committee. And the second bill you adopted a support position on in January, AB 185, by Assemblymember Grayson. This bill would require Department of Housing and Community Development to participate in the joint meetings with the Air Resources Board, and this bill has not yet been scheduled for a committee hearing. And with that, staff recommends you approve this item.
We have a motion by Commissioner Alvarado, a second by Commissioner Burke, and a question by Commissioner Dunn.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm prepared to support the motion. But I was just wondering, Paul, when you do your state and federal legislative matters reports to us, can you include a separate chart next time of those previous bills that we've taken a support position on, just so that we can have that in one package in front of us? I don't see it, for example, in the...
Should be at the very end.
At
The
the
very
end?
last page should have the 2 bills.
I see it now. Okay, good. Thank you. Just missed it. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Alvarado. Alvarado.
Just a comment. Just a comment as we go through with these bills. Are we offering any information input as the staff is drafting the language, or we are just making comments? The reason I'm asking the question, Paul, is you're looking at 285 and 59, and it sounds good. And then we sit here as a commission and we listen to academics come in, and I don't see anything in here about the impact of the ride shares. So you look at, you're going to look at established state policies on automated vehicles to reduce greenhouse gases. And then we find out that, there's 40,000 Ubers and Lyfts in a particular city every day. And so if you don't add that additional traffic and vehicle miles traveled into these bills, you're already behind. So are we finding a way to get that information to the authors
Yeah, we do meet regularly with the author staff, not for every bill that we've identified that we monitor, but some of the more significant bills. So we have met with, I think you mentioned AB 285 by Assemblymember Friedman. We did meet with her staff on that one recently. So we do, at a staff level, provide feedback in our comments, but we only bring a subset of bills forward for you to adopt formal positions.
Because I'm sure, you know, as they draft this legislation, they're going to establish goals. And we're already finding out that, you know, a lot of these goals are unrealistic. You know, they're based on reducing vehicle miles traveled, and we're finding out vehicle mile travels are just going through the roof. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I do have one public comment on this. Eric Reese, will you come forward, please? Relates to another bill, but it's not one of the action items.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to speak today and for all the work that you really do. Thank you. So, hello, my name is Eric Reese, and my public comment is in regards to Senate Bill 127, which is Transportation Funding Active Transportation Complete Streets, which seeks to require the CTC to give highest priority to accessibility improvements that improve efficiency, reduce vehicle miles traveled, and promotes public health, as well as making environmental enhancement a priority. My suggestion and proposal to the Commission for future consideration is to not only support this Senate bill, but to also take the initiative to go beyond public health and environmental enhancement. By this, I mean encourage/require all cities, counties, and transportation entities to use porous pavements, reflective pavements, or a combination of both for accessibility improvements and street/highway improvements. As an environmental science graduate student at Cal State Los Angeles, I have conducted numerous background research into the feasibility and benefits of using porous reflective pavements, and the results are encouraging. Multiple research studies have shown that porous reflective pavements can reduce pavement surface temperatures by up to 11 degrees Fahrenheit, can reduce traffic sound levels by 6 decibels, can reduce air pollution by decreasing energy demand, and can help recharge groundwater supplies through percolation. In California's 4th climate change assessment, the one thing that stands out is that as temperatures increase, road construction costs will increase between 3 and 9%, as well as the acknowledgement of the need to adapt road materials to withstand higher temperatures to avoid potential cost of over $1 billion by the year 2070. Porous reflective pavements redirect the majority of heat away from the sun and back into the atmosphere, resulting in a cooling of the pavement. I would highly encourage the CTC to work with CalCARB, which is California Air Resources Board, Caltrans, Cal EPA, CalSTA, air pollution control districts, county and local municipal governments, the governor's office, and the state legislature to come up with a study and implementation plan that uses porous reflective pavements to beat urban heat islands, beat temperature extremes, reduce heat-related illnesses and medical costs, and to help environmentally disadvantaged communities. In conclusion, I would highly recommend the Commission to go beyond the requirements of Senate Bill 127 and to use it as an opportunity to improve public health while also saving the state money in the long term. Thank you for your time and hopeful consideration of my proposal to be a worldwide leader in transportation innovation. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Eric. Any comments? Any further comments? Hearing none, we have a motion. All in favor? Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? That motion carries. So, Paul, you might reach out and get Eric's number and see what other young students we can learn from to help us, as Commissioner Alvarado talked about, all the different aspects of mobility being at the table. So it'd be great. Okay, we're going to move on to item 15. Paul.
Commissioners, item 15 is an informational item. Clark Paulson will present an update on budget and allocation capacity.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Providing an update on where we stand at this point through the January meeting with regards to allocation capacity for the programs that the Commission allocates. The total capacity for the year is $6.9 billion. Through the January meeting, $3.8 billion has been allocated. which brings us to 55% of the total progress for the fiscal year is as expected. The next topic I wanted to bring to you is, well, I should say sometimes the budget guy stands before you and gives you bad news. That isn't my mission today. And in fact, this is a celebratory moment as it relates to SB1. Often we would stand before you in March and talk about what the Board of Equalization did in their role in establishing a price-based excise tax level. That exercise ended last year, and there's no such exercise this year in March. The SB1 provisions put an end to the fluctuating price-based excise tax rates, and as of July 1st, 2019, will establish now what we refer to as the incremental tax rate at 17.3 cents, and it will be indexed for inflation. So in this chart, you kind of see the erratic pattern of the price-based excise taxes. It had a moment of increase and then had some rather sharp declines. And coming out of the results of SB1, you see a very steady pattern of this tax rate. And so this is a very positive advent coming from SB1 and will provide stability for STIP and other transportation programs. And just to review what is coming in the following months, our transportation financing package, which includes the rather detailed Chart C, which depicts transportation funding as presented in the governor's budget, will be released in April. The governor will release his revision to his budget in May, and then in June, if all goes as is required by law, the state budget will be enacted. And finally, I'll talk more about this in the next tab. But in June, we'll be coming forward with the draft fund estimate allocation capacity information. Any questions on this item?
Questions? You're good? Come on.
Thank you.
Okay, well, don't go too far because you're up to bat again. So we'll move on to item 16.
Commissioners, item 16 is an informational item. Clark Paulson will present draft assumptions for the 2020 STIP fund estimate. The purpose of this presentation is to give you an opportunity to review these assumptions before Caltrans finalizes them and asks for a vote to approve them in May. Commission staff have reviewed an earlier draft of the assumptions and provided some initial feedback to Caltrans. Caltrans made some changes, and we're continuing to review the updated version, which is being passed out before you. With that, I'll turn it over to Clark.
Thank you, Paul. Uh-oh, I just did something I shouldn't have. Okay. So just to reiterate what Paul commented on, this is really part one of a part two process in the Commission's adopting assumptions related to the 2020 fund estimate. And this first part is really just presenting information to you in draft form to give you the opportunity to review that information, and over the period between now and the May meeting to provide any input and for Caltrans to work with your staff in bringing forward to the May meeting the fund estimate assumptions to be adopted. And just reviewing that the fund estimate ultimately does the math to provide the allocation capacity for STIP and SHOP programs. So it's important to point out that the fund estimate assumptions are always based on the current statutory requirements of the state and federal government. We will be monitoring during this period leading up to the adoption of the ultimate fund estimate in August any changes that are brought forward in legislation that would have an impact on the fund estimate. And And it's worth noting that if such an event arises, although we don't anticipate that, the Commission has the authority to postpone the adoption of the fund estimate by 90 days. Our ultimate goal with the fund estimate is to arrive at the sweet spot of identifying the appropriate estimate of revenue and commitments and expenditures so that we identify accurate capacity that leads to not over-programming and not under-programming, both of which have negative consequences. So the draft assumption document that you received has 3 sections. First of all, in section 1, which I'll be reviewing with you over the next few minutes, section 1 identifies very significant assumptions wherein there are a number of alternatives that are presented to you for you to consider. In each case, Caltrans will recommend one of the alternatives, but we seek your direction for those categories. Section 2, which I'll also review with you, identifies statutory factors which have a significant impact on the fund estimate. Section 3 has individual detail assumptions that I will not review because you don't want to hear me drone on that long. But they're available for you to review and provide input on after the meeting. So we will be working over the next several weeks with your staff and seek your input on these items. A very basic review of the fund estimate mechanics. And the highlight here is to point out that where the math exists in the fund estimate, the plus and the minuses here, are the things that the assumptions influence. The estimates of revenue and the estimates of commitments for Caltrans and its programs and for existing projects. So the first key assumption that I'll review with you has to do with economic impact on fuel consumption. So obviously, the extent of accuracy with our estimates of fuel consumption lead to our revenue estimations. We have analyzed 4 sources of estimates for fuel consumption. The first is ExxonMobil, an industry estimate. The second is the Federal Energy Information Administration. The third is the Department of Finance, and the fourth is the Air Resources Board. We are recommending alternative C, which is the Department of Finance's projections. The Department of Finance estimations of fuel consumption are specific to California, and they take into consideration both diesel and gasoline projections. In each of the cases for all 4 alternatives, the economic factors being considered, as well as presumptions about use of alternate fuel vehicles, has some, in the area of gasoline, some slight decline in consumption assumed, and as it relates to diesel, has somewhat of a flat projection of consumption over the fund estimate period. The next key assumption that we will highlight has to do with federal revenues. The FAST Act, the current federal act, will be ending very early in the fund estimate period. And so most of the fund estimate period is up for future Federal Transportation Act or conceivably continuing resolutions if the federal government doesn't adopt an act immediately. And so we have 3 alternatives laid out, and they really vary as it relates to being either moderate, conservative, or aggressive in the assumptions as it relates to escalation of federal funding. We have recommended the moderate estimation, which is based on the inflation rate over the last couple of years of the FAST Act. This would particularly most closely follow the pattern if we have continuing resolutions that occur with federal funding. The next assumption has to do with the escalation that is used in estimating capital project costs. We've analyzed several alternatives. Two of those alternatives, the California Highway Construction Cost Index and the Department of Finance Index, are primarily looking backwards at cost information. The other alternative B, which uses an IHS Global Insight index. IHS Global Insight is a company that focuses on economic and financial information. Looks at the forward-looking and considers the economic forecast. It's specific to transportation. And so we're recommending alternative B, which is the Global Insight Index, because it's focused on transportation and considers future economic projections. There's also the next assumption is about the reservation of the SHOP program for minor construction projects. The current minor, and I should highlight that this is a reservation of the SHOP that's allocated by the Commission annually. It identifies a list of minor projects that don't exceed $1.25 million in total. And the department brings this program of projects to the Commission annually. And then the Commission delegates to Caltrans the responsibility to allocate those projects during the year. Each allocation is then reported on by Caltrans at each Commission meeting as part of the reporting. The current minor program reservation level is $150 million. There's alternatives to raise that level to $250 or $350 million. Our recommendation is the second alternative to increase the reservation to $250 million. We believe this would benefit in providing greater opportunity to have urgent response projects completed, that by having a greater number of smaller projects will result in greater opportunities for small businesses to compete for Caltrans construction projects, and as such result in greater development of the industry in California, that quicker delivery of projects would occur, and that as we approach our asset management, that we would have a greater effective bridge between the maintenance program and major SHOP projects. And the final item, which we have alternatives for and assumptions, has to do with the motor vehicle account. This is the account in which the vehicle registration fees are deposited, which is used primarily for the support of the California Highway Patrol and the Department of Motor Vehicles. In past fund estimates, the Commission has adopted assumptions based on a statute that says that any excess funds in the motor vehicle account would be transferred to the state highway account. Those transfers haven't occurred in recent history, and we feel that in reality there's very little likelihood of such transfers, particularly in light of analysis done by the Legislative Analyst Office that projects that the MVA would become insolvent in just a few years. And so our recommendation in this case is that we do not assume transfers from the motor vehicle account. The Section 2 portion of the fund estimate assumptions has to do with statutory requirements, and we just highlight some very significant statutory requirements related to the fund estimate. One is related to the funds in the public transportation account derived from the sales tax on diesel fuel, in which the law dictates that 77% of these revenues are transferred to the State Transit Assistance Program, as well as the program Secretary Annis spoke of, the State Rail Assistance Program. Section 183.1 of the Streets and Highways Codes dictates that miscellaneous revenues, and an example being the proceeds from sale or rental of Caltrans properties, are transferred to cover transportation general obligation bond debt. Senate Bill 1, I suppose, goes without saying, is a very significant impact on the fund estimate and the funding. Senate Bill 132 provided commitments from the state highway account and public transportation account for some specific projects. So as I mentioned, we track the statutory impact and the potential for changes. We have history for those who have been around long enough that the past 9 fund estimates, which occur every 2 years, have been impacted by some legislative action or budgetary action during the period of the fund estimate development. And so we will track budgetary and other legal proposals as it relates to the disposition of transportation funds and any proposals related to federal funding. And so that brings us to the conclusion of the discussion. As I said, we'll work with your staff in finalizing the fund estimate assumptions. We'll bring them forward to the May meeting for adoption, and that will then ensue to the June draft presentation of the actual fund estimate calculations and the adoption of the fund estimate in August. Thank you. Any questions?
Okay, Commissioner Alvarado, followed by Commissioner Dunn.
If we can go back to the capital project cost escalation.
Yes.
And we're looking at the CHCCI was used in the 2018 fund estimate.
Right.
And there's like a 2% difference between the CHCCI and the IHS. And that's quite a bit.
Sure.
Was the CHCCI accurate in 2018?
So the CHCCI mechanics look at all of the bids that Caltrans receives on construction projects looking backwards. And we have some concern, and this is being examined by the department, we have some concern that it includes bids that were not successful. So it takes the entirety of the bidding environment. And we do have a concern that it may have an overly aggressive escalation rate. It also looks backwards, and the economic forecasts show some leveling of economic growth in future years, which is why we think a more accurate escalation rate would take into consideration I think I ran out of time. would look at economic forecasting in the future to arrive at a more accurate rate than the rate we've used in the past.
Because one of our pet peeves is missing. And now we're dumping a 2% on top of the issues that we already have.
Yeah.
So I'm just a little concerned because if I'm understanding this correctly, the CHCCI, they're using, it's a California base, right? And that's just an instant.
Yes, it's bids received for Caltrans construction projects.
So that has local construction costs, that has local material costs, that has seasonal stuff, where I'm wondering if that Global Insight digs down into those very issues that are going to significantly impact the cost of a project.
Yeah, it is a national index, but it does focus on the transportation industry.
But is it averaged? I mean, obviously California is a high cost state, but I think generally the projects overall are better quality than any place else. Still, I'm just concerned. I'm just voicing a concern that we're giving away 2%, and if it comes back, then we're going to ask that question. Especially if you come back and say, well, we got a 2% increase in costs that we didn't figure into a plan, and we're going to go, well, here it is right here.
I think it's a very fair question and worthy of examination and providing a more complete response. I will say this, that this escalation rate becomes very significant in the portfolio of projects that we can complete. And so if we have a rate that's too high, we end up assuring ourselves in terms of delivering projects and using the funds. And so we do have a little bit of a bias because we're concerned about past decisions and whether we're leaving money in the bank account instead of using it. And that's one of the risks of having a rate that's excessively high, is leaving money in our bank account instead of it materializing in the most efficient and cost-effective way for delivering. But that doesn't mean your concern isn't worth examining.
Commissioner Dunn, followed by Commissioner Gometti. Or Gometti wants to go first?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to follow up with Commissioner Alvarado. You know, in my business, we build streets too. And our costs last year for streets went up 6%. So I agree with Commissioner Alvarado. I'm a little nervous that we've set our sights a little too low here. With the advent of SB1, there's going to be a big demand for general engineering contractors. And last I checked, we haven't grown that field very much. And so there's going to be a highly competitive market for which the contractors are going to have the upper hand. So I think this escalation should move up, and I encourage you to take a real hard look at that.
We will. Thank you.
Commissioner Dunn?
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ditto my colleagues on that item. Also, then, on the gas assumptions, now, and I'll grant you, I would have loved to read this before you talked, because this is a lot of information here. On the alternatives presented, you're giving us forward projections on consumption. Could you have also given us past accuracies, just so that when we see your recommendation, we know, well, okay, but ExxonMobil was better 5 years in a row, and yet we've chosen this?
Sure, we can do that. I don't have that information
Exactly.
with me, but we certainly can provide that.
It's really the past I'm looking for to kind of guide what the future might be. Maybe, maybe not.
This sounds a little bit like investment advice.
Exactly right.
It makes sense.
And to that very point, do you also look at your own accuracy in STIP assumptions? Over the last 5 STIP assumptions, how right and how wrong have you been? Granted, you can asterisk the hell out of it, because I get things change, particularly with construction costs and SB1, et cetera. But that would be information that would be good to know. How close did you get to being accurate over the last 5 assumptions, and now we're in this room?
Sure. And we can provide that. I will throw a ginormous asterisk on that.
Of course.
If you remember a couple of years back, we came mid-process to deprogram. And so some of that is like, getting wealthy through understanding what's going to happen in the economy, and it's a bit of a mystery. But it's not an invalid question, and we can do that.
Yeah, we would all do well on our own personal portfolios, but it's still just good to have the information. So thanks.
Do you have any other questions? I have a question about our goals around achieving our zero emission goals and the consumption and all these forecasts. Are we assuming that we're on a steady adoption? What kind of adoption? I'm not sure why the CARB estimate was different on some of these. So does it have to do with for example, our transit operators now have a goal? Granted, it's 2040, but they also have requirements of which fuel vehicles. I think it's 25% by maybe 2023 or something. So are all of those factors into your crystal ball?
Sure. So technically, we're borrowing others' crystal balls, the Department of Finance or their resources board. But we understand in both cases, they're considering the adoption and integration of alternate fuel vehicles in the projections that they arrive at. I couldn't tell you today what differs in terms of their assumptions on that point, but I think all of the historical patterns and predictions about or forecasting about alternate fuel vehicle and adoption of transit and so forth are considered in addition to very significant economic predictions about fuel consumption.
And does Brexit or any of those things get into the greater forecast? Or, I mean, most of our business colleagues are kind of hunkering down, thinking the recession's going to be here one of these days. We don't know exactly when. So is all that in?
You know, I don't know the nuts and bolts of all of the economic projection, but the really both the fuel consumption and the cost escalation patterns take a look at broad economic considerations.
Okay.
If we can dig in deeper to how those are arrived at to give you more information.
Well, I mean, just, you know, good luck to all of us because there's so many variables with all of this. But at least, you know, on the state goal side, and we can look, you know, I think the questions about how have we historically done, you know, if we go low, medium, and high, and we always pick medium and we always miss, then, you know, maybe we need to not go medium. But it'd be informative for us. And then I just, you know, we've had emergency after emergency, and then we're hearing this chatter, perhaps it's chatter, that we're not going to get reimbursed for some things. So at some point we've got some money because we need to go to our communities immediately. We can't wait until the check gets there here to do that. So it's kind of a little mystery to me at some of these things and which dollars are truly immediately available, and if we put a project on the list, but every other project's going over by 20%, at some point, you know, we're going to have to come back and say, you know, something's out here. So whatever we can do just to make sure that we deliver to the people everything we can deliver.
And that's the sweet spot I spoke about earlier. Our target is getting this right, because when we get it wrong, we end up off course. But we're happy to examine whatever we can to make it as accurate as possible. I could channel our former governor to say recessions come, and prediction of that is no easy game. But in a steady environment, an evaluation of how we've been doing is good.
And,
Thank you. Paul.
Commissioners, Commission staff will follow up with Caltrans on the issues that you raised today and provide additional information prior to the May meeting when you'll be taking action on this item.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
Clark. Okay, we're going to move on now to 17. Robert?
Commissioners, tab 17 is an information item. This item provides an update on the tentative schedules for the 2020 Local Partnership Competitive Program, the 2020 Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, and the 2020 Trade Corridor Enhancement Program. Staff held the first kickoff workshop yesterday here in Los Angeles, and we'll hold a second in Sacramento on March 21st. We anticipate holding a second joint workshop for all three programs, either later this month or next month, before holding individual program workshops. The attached schedule is tentative, and may change based on the outcomes of the workshops. Also, on March 1st, the Legislative Analyst's Office released its review of the Active Transportation Program. Overall, the report is positive. We are reviewing the recommendations and will discuss them during our Cycle 5 workshops for the ATP program. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, just for clarification on our agenda, it said it was an action item, but I believe this is information only. Is that correct? Okay.
Apologies.
Okay, any questions? If not, we're good. Thank you, Robert. Okay, we're going to move on to Alicia, Local Streets and Roads Funding.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Tab 18 is an informational item for the Local Streets and Roads program. To date, the Commission has approved 537 and 538 cities and counties as eligible to receive approximately $1.4 billion in road maintenance and rehabilitation account funds for fiscal year 2017-18 and 2018-19 respectively. On October 1st, 2018, the first fiscal year expenditure report was collected by the Commission, submitted by the cities and counties that received funds that fiscal year. We achieved 100% reporting compliance by all recipients in that fiscal year. $136 million of the fiscal year fund were reported as spent in the fiscal year on 1,968 projects, 1,030 of which were completed within the year. The next fiscal year expenditure report will be due to the Commission on October 1st, 2019. This will encompass all of the program funds that were received for that fiscal year and any funds that were spent by the cities and counties throughout the fiscal year. Commission staff conducted a local streets and roads program survey of the cities and counties in January 2019. That survey was conducted in an attempt to facilitate open dialogue and receive feedback regarding program implementation and CalSmart satisfactory by the users. Based on the feedback that we received, over 93% of the users were satisfied with the program in general, as well as the CalSmart reporting system that we use. The recommendations that were received as a part of that feedback directly correlated to the CalSmart reporting system and its functionality regarding data collection and user friendliness. Currently, we are working with the Caltrans Department of Information Technology to make these improvements prior to the next funding submittal cycle. March 26th and 27th, Commission staff will hold 4 webinar sessions to assist local streets and roads recipients, cities and counties in their submittal efforts, the process, as well as the navigation of the CalSmart system. At that time, we will be unveiling any improvements that were made to the system as a result of the feedback that we received in the survey. All list submittals for the fiscal year funding are due by May 1st, 2019, using the CalSmart reporting system. Any city or county that does not receive or does not submit by the May 1st deadline, but submits a complete submittal within CalSmart by or before August 1st, 2019, could be considered for subsequent submittal. We will be bringing the initial submittal approval before the Commission at the June meeting and the subsequent submittal at the August meeting. The subsequent submittal deadline will be August 1st, 2019. The State Controller's Office will reapportion any ineligible city and counties apportionment to those cities and counties deemed eligible for fiscal year funding. This means any city or county that did not meet the May 1st or August 1st deadlines will have their funds reapportioned to those eligible for the fiscal year. Fiscal year 1920 funding apportionment amount is anticipated for $1.1 billion. Are there any questions?
No questions, yes, Commissioner Van Konynenberg.
If a city is in risk of being defunded, how are they warned about that?
So if a city doesn't meet the May 1st deadline, we do directly contact via letter to the city mayor or clerk directly and notify them that they are at risk if they do not meet, at the very least, the August 1st deadline.
Could we have a listing at our May meeting of those cities that are?
Oh, of course. We will be providing all those who met and then all those who didn't. We also work with the cities and counties to find out their intention as well. So we get a status update from them in between.
Thank you.
Commissioner Gordino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Alicia, excellent report, and the write-up was quite helpful as well. A quick question about the 93% CalSmart program experience positive rating. How many of the cities, towns, and counties participated in that survey?
So 30% of our recipient cities and counties responded to the survey. The average survey response in general is 26%, so we do see that as a positive. We did run it again to get any additional survey responses after January 10th, but we didn't have much more response at that point.
Great. So thanks for letting us know the bigger universe of respondents. And perhaps at our May meeting as well, any lessons learned from the 7% who weren't satisfied? One, and two, and not to dwell on the negative, but what can we learn from what they told us? And then two, is that survey still open to the 70% that haven't participated so that we can still get their feedback?
We did close it, but we intend after this next submittal period to run a survey again, a similar survey again, to get additional feedback. In addition to that, the cities and counties that are currently registered for the March 26th and 27th sessions that we'll be holding, we currently have a 60% representation of the eligible cities and a 78% registration of the eligible counties. This is the highest registration and participation amount that we have had thus far in all of our online training attempts regarding the program. All the improvements that we are making directly into CalSmart are a direct correlation of the feedback that we received regarding CalSmart dissatisfaction, I guess you could say, or needs for improvements that were recommended. And that is what I believe would encompass that 7% that you were referring to.
Thank you, Alicia.
Sure.
Any further questions? No, thank you, Alicia. Okay, we'll move on to Lori, item 19.
Yes. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Item 19 is an information item. Emily Abrahams from Caltrans Local Assistance will be giving a presentation on the Active Transportation Resource Center, which is funded through the Active Transportation Program.
You don't look like Emily.
So Emily is there, so I just want to introduce Emily. She's the project manager for the Active Transportation Resource Center. So she's going to come here and make a presentation overview of the Resource Center.
Come on down.
Hello. Good afternoon, Commissioners, and thank you for having me here today. I am Emily Abrahams, and I work at Caltrans in the Division of Local Assistance, and I am the project manager of the Active Transportation Resource Center, and we call it the ATRC. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide the Commission an update on the ATRC's accomplishments to date and the new efforts we have underway. So the ATRC's mission is to provide resources, technical assistance, and training to active transportation partners across California to increase the opportunity of success for active transportation projects. The ATRC has been programmed in each cycle of the ATP, and from 2015 to 2019, the ATRC has been allocated about $8 million. About $3 million has been spent to date, and $5 million is dedicated to the upcoming efforts that I'll discuss today. The ATRC has about $7 million that is programmed out in future years through 2023. So what does the ATRC offer? As a whole, we offer classroom training and webinar training. We also provide technical assistance through individualized support and workshops. And we also develop tools and resources to inform and support active transportation projects. As the ATRC utilizes a combination of subject matter experts from state agencies, universities, and consultants. And we want to ensure that we meet the needs of all local agencies. And in 2018, the ATRC conducted a needs assessment survey in which we surveyed ATP applicants and eligible ATP applicants to find out their statewide needs so that we can shape the ATRC to meet those needs. So I'll begin by discussing our current efforts. To support the non-infrastructure specific needs, Caltrans has partnered with the California Department of Public Health, or CDPH, and they provide a public health perspective to the ATP, and they draw upon their long-standing expertise for technical assistance to non-infrastructure and safe routes to school projects. CDPH ATRC staff have many roles. They research, compile, and develop resource materials for non-infrastructure and safe routes to school projects. The ATRC website contains over 50 resources in order to maximize the success of non-infrastructure applicants. CDPH also provides on-call technical assistance for non-infrastructure projects through phone calls and emails, as well as workshops upon request. Since July of 2015, they have received 894 technical assistance requests that all vary in complexity, and they have hosted 5 workshops and given 24 presentations in communities throughout the state. CDPH also coordinates webinars and teleconferences on relevant active transportation and non-infrastructure topics. All webinars can be attended live and are recorded and available for later viewing on the ATRC website. Since 2016, the ATRC has held 25 webinars and teleconferences. CDPH and Caltrans have also released flash training videos, which are short informational segments about an ATP application topic or a project administration topic. And these are for quick reference. Since May, 4 have been recorded with over 546 views combined, and they are also available on our ATRC website. And in addition to what's listed here, CDPH plays an important coordination role. Through providing these services, they often serve as the bridge between the transportation and public health fields, and they also serve as a bridge between education and law enforcement as well. This helps to foster collaboration within ATP projects, and it also informs the connections between the ATP and broader statewide goals. The ATRC also provides a lot of training. Caltrans has partnered with Sacramento State College of Continuing Education in order to provide in-classroom training on bicycle and pedestrian facility planning and design. The courses offered are free of charge to the participant. The ATRC currently offers an introductory training on bicycle transportation planning and design. Caltrans staff from local assistance, design, planning, and traffic operations, along with Sacramento State, have all come together to develop the course content. We've held 10 trainings throughout the state over the past year, and we have more planned. We are also in the works of developing an online version of this training, and that should be available this summer. In addition, the ATRC offers multi-day training that goes into more depth on bicycle and pedestrian design. We do this by partnering with the FHWA Focus Cities and States program, and the ATRC works to offer this training to any agency in California that requests it. We've held 6 of these trainings over the past year and a half and are in the process of planning 3 more. Sacramento State also maintains the ATRC website and listserv to effectively communicate ATRC and ATP-related information. So switching back to technical assistance, Caltrans has partnered with staff from the Local Government Commission, California Walks, Cal Bike, and Rails to Trails to provide technical assistance to ATP applicants of disadvantaged communities. In Cycle 2, we held 12 ATP workshops throughout the state. Then during Cycle 4, we provided individualized technical assistance to 5 recipients, which included staff capacity building through focused training and networking sessions, as well as ATP application support. As a result, 3 of the 5 applicants, or the recipients that we've helped through this technical assistance, were funded in the statewide and small urban and rural components, and the remaining 2 are eligible in the MPO component. And we know that receiving funding is a great measure of success, but we know that all of the capacity building we've provided is also very valuable to these recipients. So next I wanted to highlight a tool. One more thing before that. We do plan to continue to provide this project-specific technical assistance along with ATP Cycle 5. So next I wanted to highlight a successful tool that was deployed by the ATRC last year. Caltrans has partnered with SafeTrek at UC Berkeley to co-develop an ATP-specific tool within their Transportation Injury Mapping System, also known as TIMS. So this TIMS ATP tool was used as part of the narrative question about safety in Cycle 4 of the ATP. So just to go into a little bit of detail on this tool, the tool displays bicycle and pedestrian collision data within an ATP boundary on a heat map relative to the community this project is in. So in the screenshot you see on the left, an applicant will select a community boundary as shown by the dashed square. And then based upon the relative collision numbers within that community, a unique scale is shown in the lower right-hand corner of that first image. So the locations that show up in red are the highest number of collisions within that community. And then the applicant is asked to draw their project boundary as shown here by that line in the middle of that screenshot. So you can now see with the project limits overlaid on the collision data, then an evaluator can see if the ATP project is addressing the high safety needs within that community. Then on the screenshot on the right, the tool populates the crash data within that ATP project boundary. And by clicking on each of the icons, you can get specific information about that collision, and it can generate graphs and charts to analyze the trends. So this allows the users of this tool to design a project to address the highest safety needs in their community. So now I will transition to what is underway and coming soon as part of the ATRC. First, Caltrans is partnering with the Southern California Association of Governments, SCAG, and we are working with them to develop a statewide active transportation count guidance and count database. SCAG is a statewide leader in this field, and we will base this statewide expansion off of their existing regional database. The count guidance and count database are needed to meet the data collection and reporting needs of the ATP, especially in collecting the before and after counts. This includes establishing consistent statewide counting methodologies and developing a methodology for a project-level count, which currently doesn't exist. This effort will streamline the ongoing and future data collection and reporting efforts across all MPOs and local agencies in California, and we have already discussed this effort with many regional agencies and will continue to work very closely with them throughout the development. We want to make sure that this will meet the needs of the various regions in California. So once established, this database will be available for statewide use, and it will get incorporated into the ATP application and reporting requirements, while at the same time allowing the data to be leveraged for other purposes by data stakeholders. We expect to have a contractor on board in the fall of 2019, and the count guidance is estimated to be completed around the fall of 2020, and then the count database probably the following year around the fall of 2021. In addition to this count work with SCAG, Caltrans staff in Sacramento State are in the process of establishing a pedestrian and bicycle automated counter loan program. And this loan program will allow agencies to borrow automated counter equipment to conduct counts before and after of an ATP project, and then they'll return the equipment, and then we'll loan it out to another agency for use. We're taking the steps to launch an initial rollout of this program this summer, and eventually all the data collected by these automated counters will get uploaded into that database for statewide use once it's built. So next, ATP staff will be working with UC Davis to develop a research-based, easy-to-use benefit cost tool that can compare active transportation projects through a variety of benefits. We are aiming to produce this tool based on what is known in existing bike and pedestrian research and to identify the research gaps. The tool will be built and updated and be able to be updated over time as more research becomes available to continually make the tool more reliable and consistent. This tool could be used as part of the ATP application or evaluation process in future ATP cycles. We expect to begin work this summer, and it'll be completed around June of 2021. And as I mentioned prior, Caltrans staff have partnered with SafeTrek at UC Berkeley to develop that ATP TIMS tool. We will continue to work with SafeTrek to make updates to that ATP TIMS tool, and we would like to include a feature that allows users to input specific before and after time periods so that the tool can provide the collision statistics for both the before and after conditions. This feature is expected to be used to evaluate ATP projects' safety benefits over time. Caltrans staff are also working with UC Berkeley SafeTrek to develop an ATP tool on their Street Story platform, which will allow agencies to solicit input on an ATP project. Street Story is a community engagement tool that allows agencies and community groups to collect information from residents about near misses, general hazards, or safe locations within that project boundary. So it is the intent that this ATP version of Street Story could be used as supporting documentation for the public engagement component of the ATP application and during project development. We expect to begin this work this summer and a completion date of December of 2020. And finally, ATP staff are working towards hiring a consultant to develop project assessments and evaluation. This consultant hired will be able to assist ATP awardees in conducting before and after bicycle and pedestrian project counts, safety analysis, and other benefits. And this will ensure consistency and also help with time and resource limitations that agencies may have. The data collected before the project and after the project, and 3 to 5 years after the project is completed. So this the 3 to 5 years down the line will be collected, since most of the time right after a project is completed, you may not see significant changes. So doing this evaluation later, a few years later, will give a valuable impact analysis of that project. So this effort will also include ATP project profiles or fact sheets, and they will include an ATP project before and after photos and individualized project benefits. So the goal is to develop the scope of work this spring and hopefully hire a consultant by fall to begin this work. And so now I'll close with the ATRC website, where you can find more information on all the efforts I've talked about today, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yes, Commissioner Gometti.
Emily, thank you for a very comprehensive report. You know, when I first got on this commission in the early 2000s, we had the T program, Transportation Enhancement, and now we have ATP, which is grown in size. And I'm wondering, this is really addressed maybe to my fellow commissioners, if we shouldn't be putting together a task force amongst ourselves or a committee. We have other committees that we use, but this program has grown so substantially, I think it probably needs a little bit more of our personal attention.
You have other comments, Commissioner Gardino?
Well, first, I agree with Commissioner Gilmetti, because this is now a $200 million annual investment, which I applaud, and I think we all want to make sure it is a huge success as well. And part of success is measuring what matters and accountability and transparency. And so thank you, Emily, for being here today. My direct question goes to some of the heart of your work that I really appreciate, and it's around collisions and data. In just our subregion of California, Santa Clara County, Silicon Valley, old data that I've seen, I've often heard that 50% of collisions between cyclists and motorists, about 50% are the cyclist's fault, about 50% are the motorist's fault, but regardless, the cyclist always loses in that interaction. What I hadn't heard from that earlier data is how much it is shortcomings of the design of those streets, those intersections, et cetera, which it looks like you're going to be able to help us better figure out. So, and again, this can be offline or for a future meeting, but I would love to see statewide data when fault is determined, where it is, so that we can best figure out how we address those issues between cyclists, motorists, and the design of our current transportation systems as well. Is that possible?
I think so. In that tool, they use Berkeley Safe Track TIMS tool. They use the data collected through SWITRs and the CHP. So I think that information is part of that report. So when you click on those individual icons that show up, you can get that information. And so that's what this tool does, is it kind of puts it toward a specific community, so it gets a subset of that data. But I think that's all included in the report, collisions that are through the SWITRs database that transfer over to the TIMS database.
Commissioner Dunn.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily. And I think Commissioner Gilmetti's on to something with looking at this one, so something maybe we could take a look at with staff. Emily, I'm sorry, I'm going to ask like maybe a dumb question. When you talk about meet data collection and reporting needs of the ATP, establishing statewide counting methodologies, develop a methodology to determine project level counts, what are you counting?
So there's there's guidance that already exists out there on specific counting locations, like in a spot location. And so that's what we're trying to compile together and put in a statewide consistent methodology. And the part that doesn't currently exist is how to determine a project level count. So an ATP project could be one corridor, or it could be multiple corridors and multiple sidewalk improvements and intersections in various locations throughout a city. So when you're trying to come up with one bicycle count and one pedestrian count for that entire project limit, the question is, where do you count? Do you count multiple times? Do you add up those counts? You know, how does it come into one number for that project? And so that's what we're going to try to figure out in this project.
So the answer to my question is you're counting people?
Yes,
who
it's the
walk
number of bicyclists
and the number of bicycles.
Mhm.
Are you in, is that right? Okay. So you have to ask this because you're trying to design your job, I think, from what I'm hearing. You're trying to design projects and then assess whether your design techniques are working. So over 3 to 5 years, as you've just said, you want to be able to demonstrate that the design techniques you've given to jurisdictions actually worked in an increase in both bike use and walkers or whatever. Is that a fair way? Basic information for people who don't do this for a living. That would be really helpful.
Okay.
When you do the methodologies, are you also looking at who is using this? Young, old, men, women, disabled? Are you looking at, are you drilling down to that level, or is it just like a traffic count where you're counting cars, but you don't know who's in the car?
So it probably depends on which method you use. So you can do an automated counter, and that probably won't capture that unless it's more of a video automated counter, and then you could actually, get down to that level. But manual counts, you definitely can. And SCAG has that regional database within the SCAG region, and they provide a lot of guidance and have templates and a mobile app that you can go out and conduct a manual count and collect all that information. So that's what we're trying to replicate and expand statewide and add additional features as necessary to address the needs of other regions.
Okay. And so this would be to do counting for new projects under this program. I'm very curious about this because of my own little project I'm working on in Irvine, my little just one trip a week where I'm trying to get people to use something other than a car just to get around the city. And I'm struggling because even the school districts, Irvine, 13 years in a row, safest city in America. Safest city in America, but the SUVs that line up to drop off their kids to school are blocking streets because we're just not going to let our kids walk to school. So are you looking at like communities with existing programs, or it's just for today, it's just the new projects that are coming through this program?
So the guidance that we produce out of this can be used specifically for ATP projects, new projects, but it can be used by anyone. So existing projects can definitely use it and take those counts and figure out about that. And non-infrastructure is a component of the active transportation program. And so for non-infrastructure projects, we're also trying to figure out, is a physical count in front of the school a good method to determine the change, or would other kind of survey methods be a way to accompany that as well?
Well, you'd be counting the SUVs because there's not that many kids.
Yeah, it would be like a classroom tally. And so yeah, it could be either way.
So is part of the education that you're doing also, it's to educate project proponents, or the developers of these projects, on how to sell the safety components to the constituencies in their community? Do you see what I'm trying? I'm trying to connect dots
helps.
here.
The data would definitely help build that case. And
No. I'm talking when you do your design of projects or help them with design, and then you have training for that, and you're teaching community safety in designing these projects. Do you also give them tools on how to educate their constituencies as well? Not yet.
Yeah, I don't think we
Okay,
really
think
have
about that
I
one
think
to
that could
connect
be-
dots.
We're thinking of upcoming trainings, so maybe
Right.
that's something we can
Right.
consider.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's the end user that you want to increase the end users so that your counts matter, right? As opposed to just counting for design techniques, which are also important, okay?
Yeah.
Just an idea.
Any further questions? I have a couple of quick questions. One, what about modal shift? Are we counting modal shift even between the active transportation modes, or, to Commissioner Dunn's point, out of the SUV and into an active transportation project? So is there any way for us to know?
I'm not sure exactly how you could capture that, but there might be a way. We're looking at the specific bike and pedestrian counts, and so you hope over time when you make an improvement, those will increase. But I think it is important to compare them back to like what is the auto mode share and has that shifted, and I don't think we've really looked at that.
Well, I think we need an awful lot of information. We heard earlier today that we need good data to make information. Every one of the projects that Lori is responsible for, I mean, there's always a way long list out the door, more than we can pick. So I think it really is important for all of us. Commissioner Gardino talked about the Portland bicycle study. I'm not familiar with that. But I do think we need to look and see beyond SCAG, what anybody else has done. I mean, especially as we look at greenhouse gas reduction, it's going to be important for us to know we're moving the needle. And by doing that, I think we need to know some mode shifts. People are using this in place of mom driving the kids to school or whatever else we do. I think maybe that was Fran should cut off, and we should all take a 10-minute break. So with that, I'm going to take the cue. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.